Hello and welcome once again to Southern Caregiver Resource Center's podcast, Let's Talk Caregiving. This podcast is supported by a grant from the Arthur and Rupe Foundation. I'm your host, Roberto Velasquez, and I'm the Executive Director at Southern Caregiver Resource Center. And I have the pleasure again of Martha Rañón, our Director of Government and Community Affairs, joining us as my co-host.
Hi, Roberto.
Hey, Martha. And then we have another guest today, a former caregiver, longtime advocate and ambassador for Southern Caregiver Resource Center, Tony Martinez.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. I'm glad you're here, Tony. So today, as always, we're going to talk about caregiving, caregiver issues. For the purpose of this podcast, we really want people to get connected when they hear this. We want to stimulate discussion, get families to utilize services, and know that they're not alone out there. So welcome again. And today, one of the things we've been talking a little bit, and we're having these discussions, are conversations about what happens as a caregiver over long term. The challenges, the impact that it has on yourself as an individual, as well as your family and the economy of being a caregiver. So, we have Tony and Martha, also a former caregiver. And I wanted to ask you guys, when you become a caregiver, what goes through the thought process? Why did you decide, Tony, for example, to become a caregiver in your family situation?
My situation was because it was a loved one. For me, it was Dad. So that wasn't hard. The process was hard, but what it was for, it was Dad.
And what was going on with Dad?
Dad had started dementia, symptoms of dementia. He was functioning dementia, but prior to that, he was a kidney transplant patient. And in 2008, September, he fell. And when he fell, his cane jabbed his transplant, and it just changed the whole caregiving aspect. And mom was there, but it was overwhelming for her.
So there was a lot of physical care as well.
Yes.
And even though you say he had dementia, but it was sort of mild at the time.
Correct.
And why you, Tony? Why out of everybody in the family and Martha, all the people out there, how do you decide?
For me, we're a small family. It was my brother and I. He's 3 years older. But, I learned that caregiving is not for everybody. So it was me.
Tony, and what I'm interested in hearing from you is, once you decided that this was going to be your role, what prompted you to do this full time?
It was Dad. It was family. It was a loved one.
My understanding is you had to leave your job to do this, correct?
I had a full-time job. I was 6 years into working at working in healthcare, radiology, scheduling. Was not a technician. Had a full-time job making decent money at the time. Like I said, it was 2008. And I had to decide after Dad fell. The mom, she was there doing his meds. She was in my thought, the perfect mom, the perfect wife. She was doing everything as she always did. But then the care became much more.
It was too much for her.
The need of the level of care was a little more than she can handle. So I'm looking at this and I'm watching them go to doctor's appointments while I'm at work. I'm getting calls at work. A car broke down. They're on the side of the road. Mom can't help Dad, All those things were going through my head. So I decided, it was after thinking and, okay, wow, the level of care is beyond her.
It's interesting that you say that, Tony, because in doing some of the classes that I do throughout the county, I encounter caregivers who say it starts off gradually. I start off maybe helping with a job. I'm sorry, I'm at work and I'm thinking about what they might be needing. And so I step in and I help. And before you know it, you're doing more and more of the caregiving. And it's difficult to separate when you are at work, not to think about the care that your parents are needing. And then when you're at home, thinking about work and the deadlines and everything else that's piling up.
Yeah, your mind kind of never rests, does it?
No, yeah, exactly what Martha said. And what you don't rest, because when you're at work, you're thinking, okay, now I got to help mom do her checkbook. Now I got to help mom make sure she has the meds that are needed. And then at home aspect, okay, you're at home, you're doing, okay, now I got to try to rest to go to work.
Right. And so you were caring for you start off caring for your dad. Several years passed. He passed,
Yes.
Then he passed away.
Yes.
And then shortly after, your mom started to need care.
Actually, yes, it was about 3 years with Dad. He passed. He passed in October of 2010, and 2 months later, Mom started with signs. It was amazing. You hear the stories about it, but it was unreal. It was so real that how 2 months later, she started.
So because today we're talking about the working caregiver and the sacrifices that the working caregiver makes when they are in this role, what was your thought process during that time?
At first, honestly, it's you're not thinking. You just have to do it. Mm-hmm. You just do it. And because, again, it's a loved one, it's a parent, you just do it. You don't think until you're stuck. I don't want to say stuck because it's the loved one, but then you find yourself, wow, I'm in the middle of this. It was, I thought I was going to go back to work soon after Dad passed.
So did you start gradually reducing your hours at work?
No. What I did is it took us, my process was, it took 3 months. We talked about it when Dad fell. Then I said, well, the care is different beyond Mom. So it took 3 months for us to sit down and talk and decide, okay, I'm going to give up this job, The need was more than cut the hours.
And you do it selflessly. You do it and not really, at the time, I would imagine, paying attention to what kind of ramifications that might have on you in the future. And I want to go back to something that Martha said. People gradually get into it. And we've talked about this before. And most people that go into it and they get into it gradually, they think it's a sprint. They think, of
Short
course,
term.
I could handle this. And that's why some people take longer than others to reach out for help. But often, especially with conditions like Alzheimer's disease and other conditions that progressively get worse, the journey could be 10, 15 years.
Yeah, I didn't realize it was going to be 3 years, 4 years, ending up 10 years.
Wow, Tony, 10 years.
Wow.
10 years. And because, like I said, Mom got sick 2 months after Dad, and that was a 4-year journey with her. And Mom ended up being Alzheimer's dementia full-blown.
Wow.
Right. And all the care we provided at home.
Yes.
And you did reach out for some help through Southern Caregiver Resources.
I did actually. What a life-saving, I can't say enough of thanking Southern Caregivers, and that's partly why I'm here today, is to give back, to thank you guys. And I've done a couple workshops and did a trip with Martha to Sacramento to fight for caregiver funding. But
and we appreciate that, Tony, because
Absolutely.
you were still a caregiver. You were still right in the middle of it, and you were yet finding the time
Southern
to
Caregiver,
advocate.
Southern Caregivers gave me respite to take the trip.
That's
So
right.
I was 3 years into Dad doing this alone, to answer your question, Roberto. And then I realized, wow, I need help. I didn't know where to look, how to look. I remember one time like getting the phone book and saying, where do I look? I'm old school, so I say phone book.
Right?
What's that?
You didn't do a Google search?
Yeah, no. And I went to H for like help.
That's where we should put
We
our,
should put
our
our name
number
there.
under help.
So, and then, I've heard about Southern Caregiver Resource Center. And 10 years later, here I am.
Right.
So, Tony, you were talking about leaving the workforce, and I'm really interested in hearing from you because I know there are a lot of listeners out there who find themselves in the same situation that you found yourself in, where they have sacrificed their financial status, their professional status in the workforce, and really gave up a lot to be a caregiver, which is not easy. It's very stressful and it can be very overwhelming. How did you make that decision?
Yeah, the impact was, now that I look back on it, was overwhelming because, like I did mention, it took us 3 months to decide, okay, I'm gonna quit. I had a new vehicle at the time. It was 2 years old. And so sitting down and thinking and talking, I didn't want to drain my parents, so I gave up my truck, not knowing what the impact was going to be. So then I didn't want to drain them. I gave up my truck. I was a single parent as well, raising my daughter.
That's a lot.
She was in junior high school. So I gave up my truck. I chose, again, I say the word, I chose to stop working. We didn't qualify for help, IHSS or financial help. So it was mom and dad keeping a roof over our head for the care that I was giving because that was 7/24.
Right. And it's quite a challenge because, not everybody is always the full-time caregiver. Sometimes there's people that have families that have individuals that can come in and help out with certain things, or there's a little bit of a distribution of the work in caregiving, but in your situation it wasn't that way. And I know that also that takes a toll on a person's health, psychologically, emotionally as well. You become very isolated. So it's very challenging, and so at that time maybe income and work is like the farthest from your mind because you're actually just so engulfed in the care.
But yet, so important because you need the resources to care for your parents, to buy food, to pay things.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like a double-edged sword, right?
Right. Yeah. And, to answer Roberto's question, I was alone. Like I said, my brother, my sibling caregiving wasn't for him. And, you go through the anger issues, you go through the I'm alone issues, but at the same time, like you said, you're in it. You don't feel it and see it. You're just doing it. And then again, running across Southern Caregivers Resource Center, getting the respite that was needed because I found myself getting fatigued, getting tired, not sleeping well, worrying about, wow, I'm not contributing. I thought I was not contributing.
But yet you were.
Exactly.
And I think I'm so glad that you mentioned that because I think sometimes society puts this value on a person based on what they produce, what the output is. And sometimes caregiving is not tangible, right? It stays within the family, stays internal. And so there aren't people who are saying, oh, you put in X number of hours equivalent to this number of dollars.
And there isn't, but yet the studies out there will put a value on it. They still won't pay you, but we can tell how much the unpaid estimated value is of caregiving. It's over $470 billion of unpaid care in the United States. Individuals like you, Tony, who are there at home providing the care, and if they were to be paid, that's how much money they would be making. In San Diego County, it's about $5.4 billion of unpaid care. That's a lot of money.
That is a lot of money.
Yeah. Wow. Because when I realized that I needed help and thought I wasn't contributing, We called in social workers. I had some resources that said, talk to these people. They can probably help you. When they come in, to be honest, they say, well, how much do your parents make? Well, sorry, you don't qualify. I mean, and that's another struggle, because like I said, I felt I wasn't contributing. And then Martha says, but you were, because you were giving the care. And again, there was no pay. But my pay is now, looking back, that I was able to do that for them.
Right.
Yeah.
And they were lucky to have you, Tony, because you gave so much for them, to care for them. And that's something that we see in a lot of caregivers, that it's often goes unnoticed. And therefore, those feelings that accompany that, it's really a detriment to their mental state, because then they feel that they haven't contributed when in fact they have. And
they, for me, that I had great parents, like many people, but my situation, I can honestly say, I did what I did because they were so good to me and my brother. They were good to us. What can I give? I gave to them.
And there's so many family caregivers that are out there that are employed. I in estimate about 60% of caregivers are employed outside of the home. But out of those caregivers, so many of them have to quit, reduce their hours, pass up on promotions, or sometimes they even get fired because they're having to leave the workforce because of caregiving responsibilities.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Roberto, because I was a working caregiver, and I often encounter working caregivers who have said, it's so difficult to try to balance family caregiving and then my professional life, and then forget about family, right? And forget about self.
Can't imagine.
No, and what they say is that sometimes they find this lack of support in the workforce, because you have to adjust your schedule. You have to adjust your duties and give up on certain promotions or projects. And it's almost viewed as a negative, because you have a choice, like you said earlier, right? You're choosing to take care of your parents.
Yes.
So you're choosing to pass up on this opportunity. But really what I think needs to happen is we need to have a culture shift and a societal change in how we view things, because with all of the value that caregivers are providing, we should be able to value people who are in the workforce that are doing that and find themselves in that situation. I think a lot of what we're doing now at Southern Caregiver Resource Center is try to bring these services to the working caregiver via, the podcasts.
Right. Podcast, your 1-minute caregiving tips that Martha puts out every week. Just information that an individual who is employed can tap into at their leisure. Maybe it's at night. Maybe it's at 10:30 in the evening when their kids are down and mom's resting, and now you have a few minutes to go on your computer and then
check out a live
stream of
classes,
dementia and driving, or safety, home safety, or
right.
things of that nature. Now, Tony, I know it's been you spent a lot of years as a caregiver, and you're here all. Audience can't see, but he's in his scrubs and he's all decked out and ready to go to work.
Where are you going, Tony? Tell us how you got here.
You got a job?
Just finally. This is actually, like Roberto mentioned, I'm just starting back. My journey ended 3.5 years ago, and I'm just now. This is my second week working at a facility. I decided, after trying to find work, was very hard because my resume didn't look good. It looked like I hadn't been working for 10 years. In actuality, I gave of myself working for no pay. So now I'm thinking, what am I going to do? The financial support that was left, it doesn't last forever.
There's a lot of expenses.
Yeah, it pays, my situation was homeowners insurance, the bills, the
keeping the lights on,
property taxes, life. And so now, I'm at this point where I can talk about it. And just to go back real quick to something that Martha had said, going back to, you can look at these podcasts. I remember watching your first podcast and got teary-eyed all over again because it hit home. And here I am, 10 years later, just starting. This is my second week working for money.
Yeah.
Working for something. And
as a caregiver, no doubt.
As
a professional caregiver.
And my family asked, what are you doing? You're
you
going
have
back
10
into
years
it.
of experience,
That's right.
Tony.
But it's also, some of my, like I said, my family members said, what are you doing? You're going back into it. But then the majority of the family members said, you're doing what's a passion for you. Caregiving, and then seeing what the need is. I'm not perfect by no means, but I still want to give care. I see the help that's needed. I want to give that help if I can. But it was hard getting to this point. I went back to school.
CNA license?
Yes,
Yes.
state certified as of last month.
Congratulations.
That's big.
Yeah, so I went back to school because, like I said, my resume didn't look good to employers. And that's what I feel, whoever's listening out there, don't give up, because like I said, my resume looked like I hadn't worked 10 years. Where did I work for the past 10 years on my resume? It said I was a in-home family caregiver. So when they asked, can we call your references?
You have to say no.
You can't call mom and dad, unfortunately. We can visit them.
Right.
We can go visit where they're at. But yeah, so here I am. Yeah. And it's tough at my age, I don't mind saying, I'm 54 and a half, working on 55, and this type of work is challenging.
Mm-hmm.
And you kind of
It's
starting
tough.
over.
Kind of, yes.
Yes.
Actually, yes. And that's what I feel like. I'm starting over at this point in my life. And it's tough, but it can be done. And I see myself now, and I'm looking, wow, I went back to school. I was the oldest one in my class.
Mhm.
But that gave me drive. That gave me,
The wisest one, I would say.
of course. Yeah, but that gave me the drive to, I'm going to show these young kids,
Absolutely. And I think that's also a very good example for your daughter.
So absolutely. And I wanted to ask you, Tony, now that you're back in the workforce, and Martha, who is a working caregiver, what are some suggestions you might, not that we're passing policy or anything, but what are some suggestions you might give to employers?
Well, some of the suggestions, and obviously from a personal perspective, but also talking to caregivers now that I do my classes throughout the county, I get their feedback. And it's really that understanding that we're not living in a vacuum. We're multifaceted. There is a family. There are other aspects of our lives that make us who we are. So it's not just work. We might be caregivers, right?
Yes.
We might have children. We might have family. And even if we don't, we still have ourselves to take care of. And so it's important for employers to recognize that everybody's situation is different and to be a little bit more flexible.
I think that's the key
Yes.
word, flexibility.
Understanding.
into
And maybe-
why a resume may look like it does.
Right.
Give that opportunity to ask that person inquiring for a job.
Tell me a little bit more.
Yeah.
What does this mean?
What does this mean?
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Or I need to come in at a different hour that you might have wanting me to come in, or
maybe remote connect.
Remote connect, absolutely.
Right.
Work from home or something if
Yes.
there's that possibility. But yeah, there's a lot of things that employers can do. And one of the things that they could do if they're out there listening is they can contact our organization here at Southern Caregiver Resource Center. And Martha and her team will be glad to go out there and do some trainings for their
we
team.
have a wonderful program, Lunch and Learns.
Lunch and Learns.
And so
yes.
we can come to your staff during lunch time and eat your lunch while they listen to our caregiving topics.
I think it's really important, and I know we're running out of time, but just to say that for employers, for them to be able to provide assistance to their employees, even through education, and connect them to services, I think would prove to be a very beneficial thing for the employers, a benefit, a huge benefit, because I guarantee you in the workforce, you have an all-staff meeting and you ask who here is a caregiver, whether it's for a child or for an adult, and more than half of the room's going to raise their hand.
So.
And so this will keep their employees more productive by getting connected to services, and a Southern Caregiver Resource Center helping them develop that care plan and other connecting the resources that they can then tap into and then be more productive at work.
Absolutely. You can keep your employer longer, your worker longer.
Absolutely.
So that's kind of all the time we have left. It went so fast. Tony, thank you so
Yes.
much
Thank
for
you,
joining
Tony,
us.
for being here.
That's all the time we have for this edition of Let's Talk Caregiving. I want to thank Martha,
Thank you.
Tony.
Thank you for
Thank
having
you very
me.
much for joining us and continue the discussions about caregiving. I want to tell the audience out there that you're not alone, that
No.
reaching out for help is a sign of strength,
Not a weakness.
not a weakness. And you can go to our website at scrc.care or call us at 1-800-827-1008 for more information to connect to services. And Martha, like we always say, SCRC is here for you,
Caring for those who care for others.
Thank you.